Fine.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today's discussion, we are going to focus on how we communicate in this digital age. So how has, this new digital age changed and influenced the way that we communicate? That's going to be today's discussion. So I want to start off by looking at, discussing, looking at a couple of things, looking at our use of electronic networks and the fact that we now use electronic networks to a great extent to be able to transmit data, including texts and images and videos and voice, something that we didn't quite have the ability to do, 20, 30 years ago. And so now we are in, I guess you could call it a technology space where we're using so much of our digital data is being transmitted through these electronic networks. We also have situations now where we can develop social support and we can increase our connectedness with friends and family because of these new forms of technology. If we think the first one that I could think of personally would be MySpace. When MySpace came around, it was kind of like a wow. The Our abilities to be able to connect with people in different parts of not just the country but different parts of the world, and be able to see videos and to be able to see pictures and keep up with a timeline of events and follow a person. And so what it allowed us to do was to connect with friends and connect with family, and also to be able to create, new friends, meet new people, and create new relationships with people because of that platform and because of that technology. So, a lot of research suggests that there is no longer a significant gender and racial gap, income gap, when it comes to who has access to the internet or who has access to mobile phones. So the research says that there's no longer that significant racial, gender, or income gap in terms of people who have access to the internet or mobile phones. But it still does exist. There still is a gap, so it's not completely gone away. And although we have an increase in older people having access or more usage to technology and new platforms, that generation gap still does exist, right? So there still is that generation gap for people who are using, new technologies and using these platforms, and we're still seeing that age generation gap that still exists. All right, so research also suggests that about two-thirds of adults use some form of social media, and usually the joke is older folks are on Facebook. People have this tendency now to say, well, Facebook is old. But if you really think about it, Facebook is really not that old. Facebook hasn't really been around for so long. But when you look at how fast technology changes and how fast these platforms are coming along, you'd realize how someone might consider Facebook to be old and consider Instagram and Snapchat and all that to be a much more young in standard, when we're looking at it from a standard of how technology has aged so quickly in the last 20, 30 years, how rapidly technology has changed. Nearly all Americans have some type of mobile phone, and research shows that about two-thirds of Americans have smartphones. So a lot of people are connected. Two-thirds is a lot. A lot of people have basically a computer in their hands because they have that smartphone. They have basically a computer kind of in their hands. All right, so as I alluded to a little bit earlier, the ongoing changes are quick, they're rapid, and there is this competition almost between Snapchat and Instagram. And then if you think of Dropbox versus, say, Google Drive, Google Drive seems to be winning that fight, so to speak. And Dropbox is more of your older version of technology, although nothing's wrong with it, but it's not the new kid on the block, so to speak, if you're thinking in terms of where can I save massive amounts of data. Um, Google Drive seems to be winning that. Instagram and Snapchat. Instagram is obviously owned by Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, and it is, although it is not old, Snapchat seems to be the newer go-to thing than Instagram. Although personally for me, I prefer to use Instagram. So the three big digital revolutions so far we would have to say is the internet, mobile phones being able to connect, so I guess you could call it mobile phone connectivity, and social media. Those are three big, I guess, revolutions so far as digital technology is concerned. The Internet of Things is considered to be the next big change that we have, right? So the Internet of Things. But that is already happening. So it's one of the next big changes, but it's already happening, and that has a lot to do with the internet. So we already have the internet, and we see how much we could do with the internet. I mean, if we could think back to when we couldn't purchase stuff on the internet, right? Now look at how many people buy stuff on Amazon. And there was a time when people thought, well, who would watch movies online? And look at what happened to Blockbuster and Hollywood Videos and all those places. And now look at how many people stream from Netflix or Hulu or whatever the case is. So we've seen the way the internet has transformed the way we enjoy entertainment and the way we participate in entertainment, and then also the way we do business, the way we meet people through not just social media but dating websites as well, is a new way you've seen that we see that the internet has changed the way that we do things. Artificial intelligence is also considered to be one of those big changes, and artificial intelligence is already there. And there's so many examples of that's out there. And, from Tesla cars or whatever the case is to, how people do surgeries now, and even some forms of entertainment and all that type of stuff. So artificial intelligence is something that has been there for a while, and is just continuing to grow. Alexa, another example of that also. So we're seeing these changes happening, and research says, and scholars would say that these are the big changes that we're going to see, and we're already seeing a lot of those big changes. Right, now, part of what we're also seeing is this whole idea of synchronicity, and this has to do with different forms of technology coming together and being able to get one product, so to speak, if you want to look at it like that. So we've seen a synchronization of different channels, which is really what's happening. It's different channels of communication being synchronized together, and then we have this event, this outcome. And so we're able to not just talk to someone on the phone, but to see them as we're talking with them, and to be able to get responses in real time. So video chat would be an example of where we would have a lot of naturalness because of that synchronization. We'll have a lot of naturalness where we're able to FaceTime or Zoom or Skype, all right, and we're able to see someone and in a natural way have WhatsApp, all right, to be able to chat with someone on WhatsApp and be able to see this person as if they're in front of us. And so that helps to remove certain barriers that were there, because the ability to see someone it also helps with perhaps understanding what that person is saying, and it really does help with meaning, because a lot of communication is, if you look at my last video about just some basic elements of communication. A lot of communication is and most of it, I would argue, is nonverbal, not verbal. So it helps with that. So there's a degree of richness that we have. The degree of richness that we have when we're looking at synchronization really just depends on the channels that are being used to for these messages, or for the message to be able to for us to be able to get the message. So what channels are being brought together for us to be able to get those messages? Then to what, and when we talk about richness, we're talking about what degree are we able to see the person as we're communicating with them. To what extent or to what degree are we able to hear that person clearly as when they're speaking to us? And then can we pick up on any personality cues as well? So facial expression, the tone of voice. The interesting thing with vocals is although it is, although we're in the act of saying something, it is considered nonverbal. So it's called paralanguage, and that is, it's just a fancy word for, it is not what you say, but it's how you say it, right? So how you say something, the vocals. Does this person sound like they're interested in whatever it is that they're talking about? Does he or she seem like they have a real sense of what they're discussing, or are they really just interested? And you can hear in the person's tone of voice. So to what degree can we get the tone of voice, see the person's facial expression, those personality cues, and that type of stuff has a lot to do with how rich it is. And it just depends on the richness of the communication, that is, and that depends on what channels are being used in that synchronization process. All right, so a couple examples, so a little bit about getting back to the internet and these different types of networks now that we have, and data networks driving so much, is now we have situations to where we can have large numbers of people, right, being able to address a certain issue via the internet. So now we have examples of information sharing. So if you think of, so who do you subscribe to on Instagram, or who do you follow on Twitter? Subscribe to on YouTube, and who do you follow on Instagram, and who do you follow on Twitter? And basically, that's a great source of information right now. I mean, who do you follow on Facebook? And so we see information sharing taking place in ways that we never saw before. And so we have so much more access to information because of that. However, what we also must take into consideration is that not all information is good information. So now we have a lot of information out there, but how do we decipher? How do we figure out what we're looking at is good information? How do we figure out this is bad information or good information? But the information is out there. The other thing too is social support. I mean, there are a lot of social support groups, whether on Instagram or Facebook or whatever the case is. So people might be struggling with something, might be dealing with something, but now we have these social support groups that are that you could follow or subscribe to, or whatever the case is, or on YouTube also, and you can find comfort and find some sense of peace, solace, or something like that by participating and engaging in conversations with people who are part of these groups as well. So you no longer necessarily need to go to a specific meeting somewhere, whatever the case is. You can find that meeting online, and those are some of the great advantages, of having these social support groups online, or people who advocate for social causes online as well. So I can organize a rally. I can organize a rally at any point, and I could do so and I could help to organize that rally by getting people on my Facebook or my Instagram or my Twitter or YouTube or whatever the case is, by telling them, this is the cause, this is where we're going to be, this is what I want you to do, I encourage you to come out, or whatever the case is. Again, those are just ways, right? Crowdsourcing, right? Ways that, again, the internet has changed the way we do things. All right, so information sharing in terms of, let's also look at it, let's talk a little bit about information sharing in terms of enterprise and social media. So enterprise, social media. Enterprise obviously referring to social media from the form of a business aspect. So when I think of enterprise social media a lot of times, and I think of enterprise, I think business, and I think social media. So how do you put social media and business together, right? So if you think of Instagram as an example, to where you have a lot of people now who are influencers, right? You become an influencer, which means because you have so many people following you, or on YouTube as well, that you become an influencer. And so now you become an advocate for a product, or whatever the case is, because of the following that you have. And so you realize there are careers that we have now, such as YouTubers and influencers in a social media space, that is, that we did not have 20 years ago, right? We didn't have that. But again, these new forms of technology and the internet and all that type of stuff, and these electronic networks have made way for where we can find opportunities to leverage ourselves in a business sense, so to speak, and to have commerce in ways that we could not have commerce before. And then, yes, there's, as I mentioned, there's a whole idea of the online support and all that type of stuff. And it helps us to build social capital, right? So now we can build social capital online. And when you build social capital online, what it means is you have gotten to a point to where people respect you, maybe because of the topics you talk about on YouTube, because of what you advocate for on your Instagram or Twitter page or Facebook page. And because you've built up this social capital, that's where you becoming an influencer comes in. Because now the advertiser would come to you and be able to say, well, okay, because you have 1 million subscribers or followers or whatever the case is, because you have built up this social capital, we believe you might be the best person to promote our product. And the same thing, you might also be a good person to drive a certain cause or something like that. Now, I've talked about a lot of the good side of technology and technology in terms of communicating in this digital age. So, but there are also disparities that still exist. Remember, not everyone still has an access to smartphone. Not everyone can still use certain technologies. I mean, a lot of that has to do with the gender gap. And then there also, now we got to look at such a thing as a lot of the insecurities and the obsessions now that we have on social media, where we have situations now where, people are struggling with anxiety because they're in social media, because they're so caught up in seeing the way that other people are living their lives, and maybe, feeling sorry for themselves, and, well, why can't I take these trips, and why can't I do this, and why can't I do that? And I try to remind people that, remember when someone puts out, for the most part, puts a video or whatever it is out there, they're showing you a certain side of themselves. So you're not necessarily seeing everything, or you're certainly not seeing everything that goes on behind the scenes. And people a lot of times are just projecting a certain part of themselves when they put certain things on social media. So you have a lot of people who are struggling with social media anxiety, right? And they're seeing people taking trips and buying nice clothes or doing whatever the case is, and then they're just living on their phones and struggling with that type of anxiety. And then there'll also be situations where there's cyber bullies now, and people, targeting people because of whatever reason, their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their religious preferences, or their nationality, or whatever the situation is, and targeting people online now in ways that they couldn't target people before. And then also we got to look at phishing scams, right, where people could try to hack into your finances, access your email, access your banking records, that type of stuff. So there's a lot of good with the technology, and there's a lot of transformations that have occurred that would not have occurred before. but then there's also the opposite side to it. I personally feel like it's more good than things that we have to deal with. Obviously, it has to do with a lot. A lot of it has to do with how a person uses the technology. How do we engage with the technology? Because the technology doesn't do anything to us. It has everything has to do with how we engage with the technology. So we still have those disparities and those insecurities that are out there because people and those obsessions that people fall into and get and struggle with anxiety and all that type of stuff, and those phishing scams. But overall, I think all these changes have really been for the better, and now we can communicate with people in different parts of the world. We could do business with people in different parts of the world. We can learn so much more easy. We just obviously have to be able to make sure that the information that we're looking at or the person that we're looking at is giving us good, honest, and ethical information, and we're not just seeing something online and believing that it's true. And that's one of the biggest things with looking when we look at the new forms of information that we have out there and what technology brings to us. So thank you very much for joining me in this discussion on technology. Please leave your comments. Don't forget to subscribe. And I appreciate the feedback. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Please don't forget to subscribe, and please leave your comments. I'll try my best to respond to all of them. Thank you, and have a blessed day.